Welcome to another episode of the Back to School Shootings podcast. My name is David Reedman. I'm the creator of the K-12 School Shooting Database. Today, I'd like to share the exciting news that I successfully defended my PhD dissertation this week. And I'm talking about it on this show because, as you might expect, it's a topic that directly relates to preventing school shootings. My dissertation is titled Large Language Models Versus Human Experts, a Mixed Methods Analysis Measuring Variance in School Shooting Threat Assessments. Now, that sounds kind of wordy, as most PhD dissertation titles are, but it's actually rooted in something that is far more accessible and commonplace. So the idea for this dissertation started back in 2021, and I was listening to Freakonomics Radio, and there was an interview with the Nobel Prize-winning economist Daniel Kahneman about his new book, Noise. And so if you think back to 2021, we're just kind of coming out of COVID lockdowns. I was in the middle of my PhD programs, and I was trying to come up with different topics and ideas. And all of a sudden, this concept of noise became really interesting, because what it is that if you have human experts who have the same experience and the same education and kind of the same qualifications to be doing their job, if you give them identical information, those human experts will make very different judgments based on it. And in Kahneman's book, he talks about examples where in the criminal justice system, judges have all of the training and experience that they should be able to see the facts of a case and make the same decision, but they don't. One judge might give somebody, an immediate release and a low bail. Another might hold them or sentence them to a long term in prison for exactly the same situation. This occurs in medicine with doctors making diagnoses of patients. It happens in businesses. One example in his book is insurance underwriters. And if an insurance underwriter makes a significantly higher or lower assessment of the insured value of a property, well, either you might lose clients because people aren't going to pay those premiums, or the insurance company is going to risk losing a huge amount of money if there's a settlement. So this noise exists everywhere. So anywhere that there are equally trained people, but they're making different decisions with the same information, you have noise. And the only way to measure noise is that you need to aggregate decisions from lots of people and then measure how far different individuals are from that consensus of the group. That's called a noise audit. It's one of the recommendations in Daniel Kahneman's book. So since I'm involved in school shootings and preventing school shootings, studying threats and exploring the threat assessment process, I immediately thought of, how does this noise concept apply at schools? Well, if you have a behavioral threat assessment team, or you have a school police officer, you have a school administrator, and they receive a threat, that person needs to make an assessment of, is this threat real, or is this a hoax or something that I can discount? And if noise exists in all of these other fields, in courtrooms and in hospitals and in insurance offices, well, is there noise that exists within the school environment? So back in 2021, with the help of Dr. Jill Peterson from Hamline University and Dr. James Densley from Metro State, they are the Violence Project, or the Violence Prevention Project now. It was the Violence Project back then. We brainstormed how to do a noise audit. So we created a IRB-approved survey that had fictional school shooting scenarios. So a threat coming through the internet, a threat that's just written on a piece of paper, a manifesto that's posted, something that is reported through a threat reporting app. So all of these different modes that threats are received, we created scenarios for each one of those. And for each scenario, there was a 1 through 10 score of the severity, but then there was a text based rationale of why you thought that the threat was either serious or not serious. That survey was responded to by 245 police officers that are involved in the threat assessment process. Many of them were school-based police officers, like school resource officers. And the results of that survey were exactly what Daniel Kahneman found doing noise audits in lots of other industries. Across that survey, there were officers that rated each one of the scenarios as 1, being not serious at all. And there were other officers that rated it as 10, which would mean it's very serious. There was that range of 1 through 10 on every one of the fictional scenarios. And the explanations from the officers were all over the place for why they thought something was serious or not serious. And so this is that problem of noise, that somebody who is an expert in something will make a completely different judgment from a different expert. And this matters because if you are the person that gets stuck with the high or low assessor, that can have an enormous impact on your life. If you're the defendant in a courtroom, if you have a high assessor judge, maybe you're going to go to prison for 20 years. If you have a low assessor judge, maybe you're not going to go to prison at all. If you're in a school, if you have a high assessor, police officer, or school administrator, then every vague threat might lead to a lockdown or classes being canceled, or maybe the school's closed for the whole week. If you have a low assessor, well, you might have a very specific threat, but that person discounts it for whatever reason. And that, unfortunately, has played out in real life, where there are single points of failure in school shooting threat assessments. At Oxford, Michigan, the guidance counselor who looked at all of the circumstances and said that violent drawings, being suicidal, having access to a gun, that those were not red flags. So let's send the student back to class. That is a low assessor that you would detect in a noise audit, who is the sole decision maker in that space. The same played out before the Appalachia High School shooting in Georgia last year, where a police officer went to interview the student and his father after the FBI reported threats made online by an IP address that matched their house. That police officer was a low assessor. He said, well, this sounds like kids just being kids. There's nothing to see here. And then a couple weeks later, that kid walked into his school with an AR-15 rifle. So there's an enormous consequence that we have if somebody is a high or low assessor and they are either the sole decider or they're going to have influence in the threat assessment process in a school. I never really was sure where to go with this noise audit because it didn't seem like it seemed like a problem that didn't really have a clear or implementable solution. But that was until last year, or about 18 months ago, when the capabilities of the newest large language models like ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and Llama really became apparent. So that's when I got the idea for my dissertation that, following the principles of Daniel Kahneman's noise audit, I wanted to conduct a series of tests using the large language models to assess the same threats that the humans did and measure the variance of those aggregate scores to determine, first, were the large language models accurate compared to the humans, using the average scores from the human as the correct assessment, because with any threats, we never know the outcome. We just have to guess that it's the correct assessment. So I wanted to measure accuracy, variance, which is were your high and low assessors varying more or less in the humans versus the large language models. And finally, could you create a wisdom of crowds effect, where if you take lots of either human LLM or a hybrid of human and LLM assessments of a threat, and you take the average of them, rather than having a single person or a single consensus. And as we've seen in behavioral science experiments, back to the very first wisdom of crowds experiment, where all of the townspeople were asked to guess the weight of an ox. And even though none of them were experts, at this county fair, the average of all of those guesses was within 1 pound of the actual weight of this ox. Can that same concept, where many people together are smarter than individuals, be replicated by allowing large language models to help in the threat assessment process? So I conducted those studies, and to go over the findings, I think it's really fitting, since this is a dissertation that's all about the capability of large language models, that throughout the writing process, one of the things that I did to make sure that every one of my sections was conveying the points clearly that I wanted to convey, I used Google's Notebook LM, which will make a variety of different mode summaries of a paper. And if that LLM model pulls out the key points and states them correctly, then there's a pretty good chance that your writing is also clearly conveying those key points. So for the rest of this podcast, my special guests are two robots from Google Notebook LM, and they have the final version of my dissertation, and this is their summary of the key findings. So this will not be the last time that I talk about this. I have a couple more episodes planned with some people that work in the threat assessment space, where we can talk about the implications and application of these findings in more detail. But until then, here are the Google robots.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something incredibly serious: high-stakes, real-world decision-making. Specifically, how we assess threats to schools. Those critical judgments under immense pressure that have real-life consequences. Our source material today is really interesting. It's a study pitting human experts against artificial intelligence. We're comparing trained law enforcement officers, the people dealing with these situations daily, against cutting-edge large language models, or LLMs. How do they rate the severity of the same potential school shooting threats?
Exactly. And our mission here, for you listening, is almost like a forensic audit of human judgment itself. We're focusing on reducing what Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman famously called noise. Now, noise isn't bias. Bias is sort of a predictable, systematic error. Noise is the unwanted randomness, the variability. Think about it. If two equally qualified experts look at the exact same threat scenario and come to vastly different conclusions about its severity, well, that's noise.
And in this context, that noise could be catastrophic.
Absolutely.
So tell us about the study setup. It sounds pretty rigorous.
It was. The researchers created 6 fictitious scenarios, but they were highly realistic, carefully based on analyzing over 2,000 real threat cases from across the U.S.
Okay.
And they presented these scenarios to 2 main groups.
Right, the human experts and the AIs.
Precisely. Group 1 was our human benchmark, 245 trained law enforcement practitioners, and importantly, that included 136 school resource officers, people specifically assigned to schools.
Okay, so experienced people.
Definitely. Group 2 was the AI side.
Yes.
6 different frontier LLMs. We're talking models from OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, Meta, the big players. GPT-4o, Gemini Flash 2.0, Claude 3.7 Sonnet, Llama 4, GROK 3 Beta, DeepSeek V3.
Wow, quite the lineup. So the immediate question, the sort of aha moment they were chasing, must have been, can AI actually bring some objective consistency here? Can it help in a field where inconsistency, that noise, has potentially legal consequences?
That's the core question. But before we jump into the AI's performance, we really need to grasp the scale of this human noise problem they were trying to solve. The baseline data came from an earlier unpublished study in 2021 using those 245 human officers. They were simply asked to rate the severity of those 6 scenarios.
On what kind of scale?
A simple 1 to 10 scale. 1 meaning basically no threat, 10 meaning a high imminent threat. And the problem wasn't just that they disagreed sometimes. It was the sheer randomness of the disagreement.
Right. You mentioned one officer might rate it a 2, another an 8 for the same scenario.
Exactly that. And think what that means operationally. A 2 might warrant minimal follow-up, maybe a note in a file. An 8 could trigger a full lockdown, arrests, expulsion, that huge gap in response stemming from the same initial information. That's the danger of noise.
So what did the numbers actually show? How inconsistent were the humans quantitatively?
The variability was consistently high. When they calculated the standard deviation, which measures that random scatter around the average score, it averaged about 2.0 points on that 10-point scale.
2 whole points. That sounds like a massive difference in judgment.
It is. It's pure system noise.
Yeah.
But here's the first really startling finding related to accuracy. Despite all that scatter among the individual human ratings, when they looked at the average rating from all 245 humans for each scenario,
Okay.
the average severity ratings produced by the LLMs were incredibly close to that human consensus average. The correlation was R equals 0.91. That's remarkably high.
Wait, let me just make sure I understand. The LLM's average scores basically match the human's average scores?
That's right. Quantitatively, the LLMs approximated the collective human judgment pretty well. Their average scores were typically within 1 point of the human average.
Oh.
And statistically, there was no significant difference in accuracy between the mean human rating and the mean LLM rating. So on average accuracy, they were comparable.
But does that just mean that AI is good at mimicking the average human, including any average flaws? Or is there more to it? Did they find the AI was actually, objectively accurate?
That's a really sharp question. And you're right, matching a potentially noisy human average isn't the ultimate goal. The AI passed the does it generally agree with the human consensus test. But the real test, the potential advantage, wasn't just about matching the average score. It was about consistency. Could the AI reduce that 2-point noise level?
Right. This is where it gets really interesting for me. If the AI got the average answer right, how did they measure its consistency? How do you even audit a machine for noise?
They used a clever method for what they called a noise audit. It wasn't enough to just ask the AI on once per scenario. For each of the 6 scenarios, they prompted each LLM 10 separate times.
10 times for the same scenario?
Yes, and critically, these were in separate sessions, spaced at least 12 hours apart.
So the model couldn't just remember its last answer?
Precisely. This setup allowed them to measure the stability, or the intra-model consistency. How much did the AI's own judgment vary when faced with the identical input multiple times?
And what did they find? How did that compare to the human benchmark, that 2-point standard deviation?
The difference was dramatic, just night and day, really. While the human standard deviations were around 2.0, the LLMs showed significantly lower variance. Their standard deviations were typically much smaller, usually between 0.2 and 1.0.
Wow, that's a huge reduction in scatter.
Huge. And in some cases, it was even better. Take case 1, that Twitter threat scenario. 2 of the models, Google's Gemini 2.0 Flash and Meta's Llama 4, gave the exact same rating across all 10 trials.
Perfect consistency.
Perfect consistency, a standard deviation of 0.00. It's not just noise reduction, it's, noise elimination for those specific instances.
That level of reliability is incredible. How did the researchers formally capture this difference? Was there a specific metric?
Yes, they used a standard metric for reliability called the Intra-Class Correlation Coefficient, or ICC. It measures consistency. The LLMs consistently showed excellent internal consistency, with ICC values typically above 0.90. That means their judgments were highly stable and repeatable.
And the humans?
The human inter-rater reliability, how much different officers agreed with each other, had an ICC of just 0.255. That's generally considered low to moderate consistency.
So excellent for the AI, low to moderate for the humans. That really highlights the gap.
It shows exactly how much random, subjective judgment is currently part of the human assessment process.
Okay, let's talk about something called the wisdom of crowds. Usually combining different opinions makes the result better, less noisy. Did that apply here? Did combining multiple AI assessments help even more?
It did, and interestingly, the AI crowd was wiser, or at least less noisy, than the human crowd. When they simulated combining scores, like taking the average score from a random group of LLMs versus a random group of humans, the aggregated LLM scores had significantly less variability.
So grouping AIs together reduces noise more effectively than grouping humans.
That's what the data suggests. The standard deviation for aggregated LLM groups was around 1.77, whereas for aggregated human groups it was higher, around 2.26. It makes sense intuitively. Because each individual LLM is already operating with much less noise, combining them leads to a more reliable consensus than combining inherently noisier human judgments.
That's a powerful quantitative picture. But numbers don't tell the whole story. What about the why? Did they look at the reasoning behind the scores?
Yes, and this is crucial. They did a thematic analysis of the narrative explanations people and AIs provided for their scores. This gets into the logic being used.
And what did that reveal about why human scores varied so much? Let's start with the humans who gave low scores, maybe underestimating threats.
Right. For the human low scores, a key theme emerged, which the researchers called credibility discounting.
Credibility discounting, what does that mean in practice?
It's basically when the human assessor uses surrounding context, or maybe just a gut feeling, to immediately downplay the actual text of the threat itself. Take case 5. That was a scenario about an emoji thread on Snapchat, where students were marked with hearts or guns.
Okay.
Human assessors who rated this low often dismissed it. They used phrases like kids being kids on social media, applying this broad, sort of dismissive social context.
Instead of focusing on the potential violent imagery itself.
Exactly. Their minds jumped to a socio-emotional interpretation, which can be a really dangerous shortcut.
And you mentioned case 6 earlier, the one involving the ex-wife reporting her husband. That sounds loaded with potential for this kind of discounting.
It absolutely was.
Yeah.
So an ex-wife reports her armed ex-husband is planning a school attack. Some low-scoring human assessors immediately latched onto the source. Their rationale was essentially, oh, it's just an ex-wife calling, implying it was likely motivated by personal revenge, not a real threat.
Even if the report contains specific details.
Even if it contained red flags, like mentioning weapons, targets, the husband's access. Their judgment got contaminated by assumptions about the source's motive, pushing aside the threat content. That's noise.
Okay, so that's how some humans discounted threats. What about the ones who gave high scores? What drove their reasoning?
Their high scores often came from two related places. What the study termed procedural default, or a kind of pattern recognition based on sometimes intense personal or professional experience.
Procedural default, like just following the rules.
Sort of. They might cite an institutional mandate, like we have to treat all threats as serious, period. Or they'd invoke a memory, often a recent tragic one.
But wait, following a rule like treat all threats seriously sounds like good, cautious police work. Why would the researchers see that as contributing to noise?
It's about inconsistent application and replicability of the logic. Take case 4, the one with the students drawing depicting a school shooting. One officer who rated it very high explicitly mentioned the latest shooting in Michigan literally happened after a student drew a picture.
Ah, so connecting it to a specific recent event.
Exactly. While that connection might feel relevant, maybe even be right in that instance, it relies on that specific officer's personal knowledge and emotional recall of a recent tragedy. Another officer, perhaps in a different state or with different experiences, wouldn't use that same reference point.
So the reason for the high score isn't consistently applied across different people, even if the score itself seems appropriate.
Precisely. That reliance on variable personal context or lived trauma, while understandable, introduces inconsistency. The logic isn't easily replicable, contributing to the overall system noise.
Okay, that makes sense. So compared to this human tendency towards credibility discounting or experience-based pattern matching, what did the LLM rationales look like?
It's more uniform. The study described the LLM logic as far more replicable. The LLMs didn't seem to care who reported the threat, like the ex-wife, or engage in social speculation, kids being kids. Their explanations consistently zeroed in on explicit textual clues within the scenario itself. They'll link these clues directly to established objective high-risk indicators. It was a much more structured, text-focused evaluation every single time.
What kind of textual clues were the AIs consistently picking up on?
3 main themes really stood out in the LLM rationales, showing this kind of clinical, text-based approach. First, specificity of the threat. Did the scenario mention named targets? Did it list weapons? Like in that case 3 manifesto example, the more specific, the higher the AI rated it.
Specificity, what else?
Second, actionability or urgency. Did the threat include a specific time, a date, or imply immediate action? Think back to the case 1 Twitter threat with the time mentioned. That signaled higher risk to the AIs.
Makes sense. And the third?
Third was red flag convergence. This was about multiple risk factors appearing together. For instance, in that case 6 ex-wife report, the AI likely focused on the combination of known subject, reported access to weapons, and potential insider knowledge of the school. Multiple flags together equals higher severity.
So the AI was essentially running down a checklist based purely on the text provided.
In a way, yes. It focused relentlessly on what was written, reducing reliance on hunches, source credibility guesses, or variable personal experiences. And by doing that, it appears to have significantly cut down on the noise. So, stepping back, the big picture finding seems really clear. LLMs demonstrated they can match the average accuracy of human experts,
Right, the consensus judgment.
while dramatically cutting down on that judgment noise, the random variability that plagues high-stakes human decision-making.
The implications for how things are done in the real world, especially in schools trying to manage safety, seem potentially massive here. The study suggests a couple of practical ways LLMs could help almost immediately.
That's right. Two main pathways stand out.
First, you could use them as part of a human LLM hybrid team.
Right. Exactly. Imagine a school resource officer looking at, say, that Case 1 Twitter thread. Before making a final call, they get an input from an LLM. Let's say the LLM consistently rates it a 7 out of 10, based purely on the specific time mentioned and the violent language.
Okay.
Now, if the human officer initially thinks, it's probably fake, and rates it a 2, that huge gap between the human score 2 and the low-noise AI score 7 immediately flags it.
Like an alert system for potential human error or bias?
Precisely. The AI acts as a kind of statistical anchor, grounded in the textual evidence.
Yeah.
It could prompt the human to reconsider, maybe look closer, helping to correct for bias, or even just a bad mood that day, reducing the noise in the team's final decision.
That makes a lot of sense. What's the second pathway?
The second one is potentially even more impactful, especially for equity and safety. LLMs could potentially serve as the sole assessor, or at least a primary screening tool, in schools that are under-resourced.
You mean places that just don't have trained experts readily available?
Exactly. Many schools, particularly in rural or less affluent areas, simply lack the budget or personnel for a dedicated, trained, multidisciplinary threat assessment team. Deploying an AI tool that performs with the accuracy of the human consensus, but with far greater consistency, well, that could offer a crucial, reliable layer of unbiased assessment where, frankly, very little might exist right now.
That could be a game changer for those communities. It feels like this research isn't just about school safety, though. It provides a template, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The study explicitly positions itself as a foundational framework for comparing the assessment abilities of LLMs to those of humans more broadly.
In almost any field where judgment is critical.
Anywhere complex, high-stakes judgments happen, this framework where you measure not just did the AI get the average answer right, but crucially, is its logic consistent and repeatable, can be applied across the board.
Give us some examples.
Well, think about criminal justice. Sentencing disparities are a huge noise problem. Or complex medical diagnoses where consistently rating symptom severity is vital. Intelligence analysis, financial risk assessment. The list goes on.
So the potential is there for AI to help standardize decision-making and to reduce harmful inconsistencies in many areas.
If LLMs can demonstrably reduce noise in a field as complex and fraught as assessing threats of targeted violence, as this study suggests they might, then yes, the potential is there to fundamentally improve how we make critical judgments across society by making them more consistent and less prone to random human error.
It's a really profound idea to end on, that maybe the biggest immediate win from AI in some areas isn't superhuman intelligence, but just reliable consistency, removing the noise, something for all of us to think about. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today.